Welcome into the latest episode of the Dribble Drive. Austin Render, your host, with you here. Thanks so much for listening, downloading, subscribing, rating. We appreciate it all. It's how we know that we're doing a good job, and we appreciate everything that everybody's doing, listening. Like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. It's where you can find us. You can also find us on the Back Home Network YouTube channel every Monday at 7 o'clock. And today's episode, we are joined by the newly minted play-by-play man of the USC women's basketball team, Eli Kleinmann. Eli, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations on the gig, and thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, I figured it's been long enough. We've talked about enough teams in this conference. We should probably talk about the team that's going to be preseason number one, maybe not only in the Big Ten, but in the country, and that's the USC Trojans. They bring back so much with this team. But before we talk about the team, just talk about a little bit of your experience with USC, kind of being a student there, and what you've gotten to do and how you got into this role you're in now.
Yeah, so I've been calling games for student radio for the last 3 years now. Time flies quickly, and just graduated this past May, but I've spent a lot of time covering this USC women's basketball team, and really it's been awesome getting to see the growth of this program over now the last 4 or 5 years. Lindsay Gottlieb got hired just about 3.5 years ago, and so she's going into her 4th year. And last season I got to experience as part of student radio covering the team that won the Pac-12 tournament, went to the Elite Eight, was a 1 seed. So it was a really cool experience, and now I get to stay on and keep doing it with this team and keep going on this journey with them.
And I'm guessing, Eli, you're a humble guy, but I'll go ahead and say it. He is a first-team All-American from the Jim Nantz Award, so congratulations on that. A great honor coming out of college, certainly. Let's talk about USC. Great team last year. Extremely talented team. Obviously got a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, made a run to the Elite Eight. When did you realize last year that there was something special with this USC squad?
Well, I appreciate that, by the way. And I think it seems a little strange to say it, but I think it had to be night one against Ohio State in Las Vegas. The game actually not even night one, day one, tipped off at 11 a.m. Pacific time in Las Vegas. And there was a lot of talk about what Juju Watkins could be entering the season. Number 1 rated recruit in the country, a top freshman. Some people were saying generational prospect, but a freshman. So you obviously want to have some caution. And then all of a sudden against Ohio State, she puts up 32 points. She leads them to a win over a top 10 team in the country on opening day. When she was on the court, USC looked like they could be one of the best teams in the country. She went off the court in the third quarter because of foul trouble when USC had a double-digit lead, and all of a sudden that lead just vanishes. And then she comes back in the fourth. Again, USC takes control. And all of a sudden you're realizing this good Ohio State team, I mean, the team that won the Big Ten Conference, that brought a lot of pieces back and added Celeste Taylor, all of a sudden you're realizing this USC team can compete with some of the best teams in the country. And from there, they just kind of continued to roll all season.
Yeah, that game was so impressive. I certainly had my eyes glued. I don't think we played on that opening day, so I was watching games all day. That one was the one you got so excited for, and USC really took it to them. You mentioned that comeback Ohio State made, but for the most part, USC was clearly the better team in that game. And you mentioned 31 of the opener for Juju Watkins. Was there a specific moment maybe in that game? Maybe it's later in the season where you just realized the special, unique talent that Juju Watkins is and what she could potentially do as a generational player at USC?
That's hard to say. I mean, there were so many moments that she just captivated everybody, including myself. I mean, that opening night one thing that I can remember, one of her first buckets, it really became one of her signature moves, was the Euro step. And all of a sudden she just goes into the lane and just loses a defender with the Euro step, and just the ability to score with ease, the ability to pull up from the mid-range. But look, we all knew she was great by the time this moment happened. But you get to the Stanford game, the game that she's really took hold of a national audience. She was already great, already a star, but scoring 51 points really does elevate you in that way. Is in the second quarter, I'm looking at the stat sheet. I actually traveled up to that game to call it. And it's the early in the second quarter, maybe 2 minutes in, and I'm looking at the stat sheet and it says she has 22 points, 24 points. And I'm just like, it just like caught me off guard on air, caught me off guard. I just pause as I'm trying to say how many points she has because I'm like, this can't be right. We're in the second quarter of the game, and she has what most people would say is already a fantastic game. If you score 24 points against the number 2 team in the country, you're already doing something really well. And we had about 7 minutes to go in the first half. And all of a sudden I was like, well, this could be a really special night. And lo and behold, it was. But that's the moment that really stands out from this season. I mean, among plenty others.
That's bold. Yeah, 22 points first quarter could be a special night. It certainly did. You were right on that one. I'm curious your thoughts on this because I have thoughts as well, but you are my guest, so I'm gonna let you go first. Obviously, with Caitlin Clark the past few years, it's felt like she's kind of been anointed the face of women's college basketball, and she's done so much for the game. But I think now that she's gone, there are people in the media that want to kind of anoint somebody else. Like somebody's always got to be the face of women's college basketball, whether that's Paige Beckers, Juju Watkins. Have you heard anything from Juju about like how she feels? What if she's heard that? Does she feel like she's the new face of college basketball, or is that something that doesn't even seem to come up?
I haven't heard anything in particular, but it just doesn't seem like that's something that Juju gets all that caught up with. I mean, truly one of the most humble and kindest people. And I think for the most part, she's trying to do her best and lead USC. And, now she has plenty of role players around her and stars around her when you talk about the additions. And I just don't think that's something that is such a huge focus. I mean, I think it was Gino who said it during the NCAA tournament when someone asked him who he thought was the best player in the country. And he's like, well, I think it's Paige. She's on my team. Everyone's going to have their own opinion about it. Caitlin Clark certainly took over last season and was widely considered the best player in the country. I mean, look at the awards and by all means deserved it. But I just think everyone's going to have their own opinion on it. It doesn't seem like that's something that is that big of a deal here at USC to Juju.
Yeah, and I'm in the, and it's part of the reason I created this podcast because there are more than just one good player in women's college basketball, and so my thought process is we don't always have to crown somebody as the leader of this sport. There's thousands of athletes that are playing this sport. There can be more than one that kind of leads the way. I mean, you can say there's always going to be best. I mean, somebody's going to win that award, but it doesn't always have to be a face. That's a lot to put on somebody like Juju Watkins, who is just a sophomore, despite how awesome she was last season. So I just wondered if there was ever anything asked of her of that, because it just feels like there's some people that really want to run with that narrative. But I think that hopefully with Caitlin Clark graduating now, it can be, okay, she brought some eyeballs to women's basketball. Now let's kind of spread those eyeballs out and show off all the great talent we have in this game, which is what I'm hoping for this year. You mentioned some of those additions playing alongside with Juju. She's certainly not the only star on this team. USC goes out and grabs Kiki Iriafen and Talia van Oelhoffen from Stanford and Oregon State, a team that already probably would have been one of, if not the favorite in the league, now adds 2 stars to the roster to go with Juju Watkins. What do you feel like this team could look like with all of these weapons kind of gathered together?
I think the ball can be a little more spread out. And I think it's important to talk about how good the additions are, but also mentioning that last year, a lot of the attention was on Juju Watkins, and rightfully so. She deserved a lot of it, but there were excellent pieces around her on that USC team, maybe not as big of names because they transferred from the Ivy Leagues, but by the time the season got to an end and we got to the NCAA tournament, people were starting to realize that the Ivy League transfers in Mackenzie Forbes, in Kayla Padilla, in Caitlin Davis made a huge impact. And I think that really sets the groundwork for once you get to the offseason and transfers are in the portal and looking at places to go, it gives USC the groundwork to see, look at what we did. Now look at what we can do with you. And so I think that really helps when you add a Kiki Iriafen, a Talia van Oelhoffen, and all of a sudden, again, you bring in the veteran presence, a pair of seniors, and all of a sudden now you're surrounding Juju Watkins with a lot of talent. And I think it's also important to remember Rhea Marshall because while she flew under the radar last year for the most part, she was a 5-star big coming out of high school, and she has played like it for the most part over her 3 years at USC and is really the anchor of that defense inside. And she'll play a huge role as well. So all of a sudden you're talking about 4 players that can be all conference players. And I think that's what makes it really exciting for USC. The ball isn't going to stick. USC likes to play fast. Everyone's going to get their touches. And there were times last year where Juju Watkins was getting double teamed all the time. And that's going to be a little bit harder because you have 2 players in Talia and Kiki who can score the ball at will and can dominate if you give them the right looks.
Yeah, this is going to be a team that is going to have so many ways it can beat you, and not just Juju. Obviously, the attention will have to be spread out. At times, did you feel like this team needed a little bit more depth last season to maybe take some of the load off of Juju Watkins, who had to play a heavy minute load? And do you think with not only these transfers, but a super uber talented freshman class could potentially do that?
I think the depth is important because that means you can give more minutes to some of the bench players. I think you can get a little more rest for your starters. But I think for the most part, look, Juju Watkins carried a large part of the load for USC last season. No one's denying that. She was fantastic. A first-team All-American, freshman player of the year. ESPN named her runner-up for National Player of the Year behind Caitlin Clark, and she was the second leading scorer in the nation. But I do think it can help a little bit to have the depth, especially not just the transfers, but that freshman class, because you have more options. You have players you can bring off the bench. And just another year in the program from some of these other players like Clarissa Akunwafa, Malia Samuel, Dominique Darius will all have another year with USC. I think it was talked a lot about how it was Juju and everyone else on this team. And that's fair because, again, Juju Watkins averaged over 25 points per game, set the USC freshman scoring record, set the national freshman scoring record. But when she needed help almost always arrived. And when you look at it, you look at a game like the Pac-12 tournament championship game. After Juju had twisted her ankle against UCLA in the semifinal 2 days earlier, and she didn't have her best game against Stanford, Mackenzie Forbes picks up the load. Late in that UCLA game in the semifinal, USC needed a big bucket to tie the game, and the Ivy League transfers come through there. So I think while there is a lot of the load that goes on Juju Watkins' shoulders, last year there were players who picked it up when she needed help. But I think it's always nice when you add 6-7 freshmen to transfers that are seniors with experience, all Pac-12 players. It certainly makes things going to be a lot easier going forward.
Yeah, let's just kind of run through some of these names and rankings that USC has added. You've got Kennedy Smith, who this is when I was creating this spreadsheet. So it's been a couple of weeks. I don't know if the rankings get updated at this point anymore. But Kennedy Smith, number 6 overall. Kaylee Heckle, number 13. Avery Howell, number 16. You also have number 47, number 54, and number 92. So 6 in the top 100, 3 in the top 20. It is a loaded team and another loaded freshman class. I would imagine they expect some of these players to make instant impacts. What do you know about some of these incoming freshmen for the Trojans?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement about this freshman class. I mean, the number 1 freshman class in the country, and for a reason. I mean, it's not just that you bring in a bunch of freshmen, which can sometimes in college athletics help boost your ranking, but you're bringing in some really, really good talent. And I think, it starts with Kennedy Smith, partially because, again, she's another LA native and funny enough, was rivals with Juju Watkins back when they were in high school. Now they team up at USC, and she will provide an instant impact. I have no doubt about that because she is a wing and really can fit right in for what USC needs. And then From there, you go down the list. Kaylee Heckel is a point guard. She's explosive. Everyone talks about how fast she is. She said it when she's talked in interviews. She likes to push the tempo, which she will be able to do at USC because that is really a style they want to play. Howell is going to be a player the Trojans will use because she can shoot it. She has versatility. And then, down the list you go with other freshmen, some good shooters. Vivian Iwachukwu, who is the sister of a former USC men's basketball player, Vince Iwachukwu, will provide more depth at the big spot, which could be important at times because there were moments last year where USC was a little shorthanded in terms of depth at the big position, but you also had Kiki Iriafen, so that helps as well. I mean, it was that Stanford game that USC really felt like they could need another big in that moment because they had three they really trusted in Rhea Marshall, Clarissa Akunuwafo, and Caitlin Davis. And all of a sudden, because they were guarding Kiki Iriafen and Cameron Brink, all three of them fouled out with about 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And so all of a sudden, you're without a big trying to guard two of the best bigs in the conference. And USC was able to hold on, but it was certainly a bit nervous coming down the stretch there. And so I think always adding some big depth is important just in case of foul trouble, which, happens all the time.
That Stanford team put some teams in some real difficult defensive matchups. We saw them early this season, and they got the best of the Hoosiers handily, putting Mackenzie Holmes in a tough spot. But, I mean, if you're coming into the Big Ten, you got to have solid post presence. You're going to have some really good posts around the conference, and Alexis Markowski and Hannah Stolke, Lauren Betts now in the Big Ten as well at UCLA, Sarah Williams at Wisconsin. It's going to be a really good league for post players. So bringing in Kiki Iriafen will certainly help that for USC. I talked a little bit about this last week with Dave Marcus of UCLA, but is there kind of a feeling in Los Angeles, like an excitement about these two teams and the way they're both peaking at the same time as they join a new, very competitive conference? Does it feel like there's a little bit more excitement in the air around LA basketball right now?
Without a question. And I think it's not just from USC fans, although USC fans are really starting to attach to this team and starting to show up. But I think just basketball fans in Los Angeles are excited for what these programs are building, and with good reason. I mean, look, just alone in the 3 games they played against each other, 2 here in Los Angeles, 1 in Las Vegas for the Pac-12 tournament, they were all epic battles. UCLA got the win in the first one in Westwood. Trojans really had control for most of the way here at Galen Center, but it got a little close at the end. And then in Las Vegas in the Pac-12 semifinal with a chance to go play Stanford in the title game, it went to double overtime, and it was just back and forth, blow for blow. I mean, you look at UCLA with Kiki Rice and Lauren Betts, but so much more, and they've added a bunch of transfers, and London Jones can shoot it as well as just about anybody in the country. And so there is a lot of excitement. And USC, you just kind of watch the excitement build last year, and all of a sudden you're going from a good crowd to a sold-out crowd. And all of a sudden the upper deck is filling up at Galen Center. And a lot of the criticism at USC women's basketball 5 years ago was that people didn't really show up. But Lindsay Gottlieb has showed if you put the team on the floor that creates excitement like this USC team did last year, and I have no doubt this year, people are going to show up, and they showed up in numbers at the end of the season. But especially when these two teams will play each other this year, once at Galen Center on the campus of USC and once over at Pauley Pavilion of UCLA, that's when like the excitement reaches an all-time high, and both coaches asked for fans to keep showing up when those two teams are not playing each other. But both buildings were packed when they played each other, and I assume it'll be exactly the same because there is a lot of excitement about what these two teams are bringing this year.
They're probably going to be number 1 and 2 in the preseason Big Ten poll whenever that is released. They bring in so much talent into this new conference. Before we shift over to the Big Ten, talking about that a little bit, obviously an Elite Eight appearance last year for USC. If there's something that they could improve upon to maybe jump, I know sometimes getting from the Elite Eight to the Final Four is truly just about who you draw and the matchups you get in a tournament, but if there's something you saw last year that, okay, if they can just improve this little part of the playing style of the game, if this person could just step up, just take that next step as another year of experience to get to that Final Four, what is it for this USC team?
That's a hard question to answer because I think that in any game you can point to one thing and say, hey, if this improves, all of a sudden you become better. And there certainly are things that USC wanted to address at times. I mean, in that first UCLA game, they struggled a little bit with rebounding, but they really excelled at rebounding down the stretch of the season. So you look at that and say, okay, well, they got a lot better at that. They've been very solid defensively over the last couple of years. Coach Beth Burns, who's the associate head coach for USC, is really the leader of that defensive part of the team, and she's excellent at it. And I think it's hard because the game was back and forth coming down the stretch in the fourth quarter against UConn in the Elite Eight. One shot drops, and all of a sudden it could be USC that was playing Iowa in Cleveland instead of UConn. So it's really hard to point to one thing, especially when you come that close and you play a really good UConn team. Look, USC played a really good Ohio State team last season. One thing that'll be really interesting to watch this year is USC has had 3 non-conference games announced so far, and they're against UConn, Notre Dame, and Ole Miss. 3 teams that most likely will be in the top 25. UConn and Notre Dame could easily be in the top 10. UConn could be in the top 5. So you're really going to see USC challenge itself a little bit more in the non-conference schedule, play some tough competition that they may very well see again in March. And I think that's always something helpful just to be ready, because you see the elite talent that a team like UConn brings, where almost everyone is a 5-star. It is a little different. There's some really good teams in the Pac-12, but that is a program that over the last 30 years has shown that they sustain themselves at such a high level.
Yeah, I mean, basketball, we both know this, and most people listening know this. When you get past the Sweet 16, at that point, it's all good teams. And the difference between you getting to the Final Four and not getting there isn't necessarily always about, well, we didn't do this well. It's sometimes just about, you know what, that team made one more shot than we did. And that was kind of the situation with UConn and USC, 2 very good teams. And we expect to see both of them in a similar position next year. Let's kind of talk about the transition to the Big Ten. What do you know about the conference the Trojans are about to join? I know you guys saw Ohio State and Penn State last year. This will be a very different Penn State team than the one you saw. But what do you know about this conference you're about to jump into?
I mean, obviously, everyone watched a lot of Big Ten basketball, if only it was just Iowa, but people still tuned in. And look, Iowa's going to be very different, but I don't have any doubt that they will be really good. You mentioned Hannah Stolke comes back. They added the Villanova transfer, Lucy Olson, and Ohio State's going to be really good with McMahon coming back. And so I think, USC will have its challenges. Look, USC is going to be traveling all over the country this year, but I think they're ready for it. And it's just different than the Pac-12 in the sense that I think in the Pac-12, look, teams are changing every year. That's how basketball and college works. That's how every college sport works. But the coaches, for the most part in the Pac-12, have stayed the same in a lot of places. I mean, look at just from when Lindsey Gottlieb left Cal and came to USC. Corey Close was still at UCLA. Tara Vanderveer was still at Stanford, although she just retired. The coaches at Oregon and Oregon State were both the same. Washington State really hadn't had a coaching change. So you're have a lot of stability in terms of coaches, which means you see a lot of the same style of basketball. Now USC is going to a new conference where they will have to redo some scouts, right? You can't just take what you had last year and change it a little bit. You have to completely redo it to get ready and prepare for these teams. And the same on the flip side of the coin is that all these teams haven't seen USC. And so now they have to prepare for the Trojans in a way they haven't done before. And so it'll be really interesting to see as USC gets to see some new styles.
It'll be great to have them in the conference, them, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, all very good teams loaded with talent. You guys, as you mentioned, playing Ole Miss early in the season. You're heading to France for the opener. You mentioned that it's kind of an emphasis on getting some tougher matchups early in the season. You got Ohio State obviously last year, and what you said earlier that kind of showed you what they're capable of. So I would imagine that's what they're hoping to get out of that trip to France as well.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's twofold, I think. Obviously, USC has big games and they want to play some tough competition, challenge themselves. But at the same time, it's so important to appear in the national spotlight. I mean, you see how that can help a team take off. You have a big performance on the national stage, and all of a sudden, your profile goes way up. And that's what USC was able to do last year. And that's what they're hoping to do again this year. But some really fun matchups. You go to Paris to start the season. You come home, and a couple weeks later, you're hosting Notre Dame at Galen Center. And then right before Christmas, you're traveling across the country to face UConn. And so I think there's a lot of fun matchups. If you're a fan of not just USC women's basketball, not just the Big Ten women's basketball, but just college basketball in general, it should be really exciting to have these high-profile matchups where you get some of the best players in the country going at it again, right? Look at Paige Beckers and Juju. Look at Hannah Hidalgo and Juju and Kiki Iriafen. And so it should be a really exciting non-conference slate.
No, you're totally right. I mean, it's not just about your specific team, but just as sport watchers, it's why we love Feast Week, because it's kind of that moment in the early part of the season where we see good teams playing each other. It's not always guaranteed. A lot of teams have started to schedule weaker non-conferences because conference play is getting so tough that you don't want to take chances. But as neutral basketball fans, we love to see these types of matchups. They're the things we look forward to. I'll certainly be excited. A couple of great games in Paris with UCLA and Louisville also playing in that event over in Paris. What are some of the things you're a USC grad? You've been around the Pac-12 a lot. What are some of the Pac-12 memories that might live with you as we unfortunately lose one of my favorite conferences to watch?
I grew up in the Pac-12's backyard. I'm from the Bay Area. Grew up in Berkeley, so Pac-12 has been really everything that I've ever known in terms of college athletics and specifically college basketball. But I think you end up remembering some of the great teams and the great matchups. I mean, look at Stanford all those years, but there were plenty of teams that challenged Stanford to be the team at the top of the Pac-12. I mean, Oregon with Sabrina was really exciting, and Kelsey Plum at Washington was a ton of fun. And you just watch all these great players. Arizona with Ari McDonald went all the way to the national title game and were one shot away from winning a national title. Utah with all the pieces they've had over the last couple of years. And so I just think you remember all these great teams, all these great players. I mean, you can just look in the list of All-Americans and stars that have come from the Pac-12 into the WNBA, and really every professional sports league is just so long. And so, it's fun to remember back to some of those great players, some of those great teams, and just those great matchups that you would see every weekend.
There's so many good moments from the Pac-12. That Ari McDonald team took out the Hoosiers in the Elite Eight that year. That was a fun Arizona team to watch. As you get ready to join the Big Ten Conference, are there spots you're excited to maybe broadcast from, cities you're excited to go visit on some of these trips? What excites you about what could be ahead for you as a broadcaster in the Big Ten?
Well, I won't get myself in too much trouble. I'm excited to go to every Big Ten town. But in all honesty,
everybody who's come on before you's picked their favorites. It's okay.
I look. There's definitely some places I'm excited for. I'm excited to also, I think, check out a lot of these towns that I haven't gotten a chance to go to. But I think, and I'm not just saying this because you're with Indiana, but I think Assembly Hall is a place that everyone talks about. It's one of the best places to experience a college basketball game, and USC has that on the schedule this year, so that should be a lot of fun. going to Iowa, a place that has established a women's basketball culture, will be really fun this season, even though Caitlin Clark's no longer there. And I just think getting to check out a lot of these really cool towns across the Midwest. USC goes to Madison this year, so it should just be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun this season, really getting to see all these new teams and also getting to check out a lot of these new places.
That's a good diplomatic answer. But, I mean, every town does have something to offer. You learn that as you go, and that's one of the things we try to do as broadcasters when we're out on the road, try to go and enjoy some part of the college town that we're staying in the night before the game. But and all the arenas certainly have things to offer as well. Well, Eli, we're excited. What's that?
Oh, I was just saying, I was like, I need all the restaurant recommendations people can give me. A lot of new towns, a lot of places I've never been, and happy to try out. Love to try new food. So
well, when you come to Bloomington, we'll give you some spots to go try, and I'm sure we can get you in the broadcaster group, and we'll get you situated on where you're going this year. But we really appreciate you joining us. We're excited to have you and USC as a part of the conference this season, and didn't feel right to be doing all these team previews without getting the potential #1 team in the country previewed. So thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Of course, really excited for this upcoming season.
Well, we will be with you every Monday night, 7 o'clock on the Back Home Network YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe, download, rate. We appreciate everything that you guys do as listeners to let us know how we are doing. The feedback is much valued. For Eli Kleinmann, I'm Austin Render. We'll see you guys next Monday as we continue previewing the Big Ten Conference on the Dribble Drive.